The first section comes a little bit late in the novel. Let's see, I'll make sure I have this right. The book has 21 chapters, and the first 20 of them are told in the past tense because it's an account of a year in the life of a young psychiatrist living in New York City. And the 21st chapter is told in the present tense because it's very close to the time at which he's doing the telling. And you will see, hopefully you'll see why I have picked this particular section of this evening. I have begun to organize my office. The office is bare, for the most part, but I have brought in a few books, and my computer has been set up with a pair of small speakers that I can use to listen to music in between appointments. On the door outside is a beveled brass nameplate that Eng had made before I even arrived. On the corkboard behind my chair is pinned a postcard of Heliopolis that I discovered by chance in a used bookshop 2 or 3 weeks ago. It is yellowed with age and depicts a street shadowed by a building to the right. The building has what looks like a medieval European bell tower with 2 pairs of columns on each side. 2 men, tiny figures, walk along the side of the building. They are dressed in white robes. Another man, only a little larger, stands in the middle of the empty street, looking out at the photographer. He is also in an ankle-length white robe, but on top of his, he wears a black jacket. To the right of this man, the street is patterned with the converging silvery lines of a street tramway, and near the horizon line, there are 2 trams. Their upraised articulated elements, which connect them to overhead wires, make them look a little like houseflies. To the left of the otherwise bare street is a smaller, or perhaps simply more distant, building, and one of the towers of this building is topped with an onion dome. The postcard, which is undated, simply reads, in small white print on the photograph, 9108 Cairo, Heliopolis. It is not a picturesque card. The sky is washed out, the shadows are dark, the composition of no great interest. It looks like something someone has forgotten, not something anyone would intentionally tack onto the corkboard. But I cannot shake the feeling that the small man in the black jacket and white robe, whose face is invisible because of the shadow of the street, plays the role of witness and watches me while I work. And indeed, it was this little figure who first compelled me to pick up the card. Only later had I noticed that it depicted Heliopolis. The second section I'm going to read is from much earlier in the book, near the beginning. Julius, this story unfolds because Julius is somebody who walks around a lot. He goes on late night walks in the city for great distances, sometimes he walks in the daytime. And the history of the city comes to him, and memories and thoughts come to him as he's walking around. So this section is one where he has just been wandering around downtown, and he accidentally walks by the World Trade Center without actually intending to have gone there at night. And then he walks past it and goes to the water. I should mention that the story takes place in 2006, so in that sense it's a post 9/11 book. And just one more thing I should mention is that in the middle of this section, somebody else's voice cuts in. It's one of his patients, and Julius in this book identifies his patients just with the initial. I suppose he's protecting patient-doctor confidentiality. There was a calm inlet just in front of the building, on which several boats, one of which had a sign for the Manhattan Sailing School, bobbed gently. I went down a short flight of wooden steps and walked onto the pier and alongside the boats, and beyond them into the section where there was water on both sides. The inlet was to my right, the river to my left, and I faced out to the left, settling my eyes on the black water. the scattered lights of Hoboken and Jersey City, and above them the black sky. The sound of the water fell into my ears, and out of those murmurs, M's plaintive voice. How could I be so stupid? Turkish American wife, Turkish mistress. I always told her I had business in Ankara, which I did, but she didn't know about my other business. And this other one, I gave her $300 every month. It was a good arrangement, I think, or I should say, I thought. I didn't think. One day she wrote and asked for more. Women are crazy, doctor, even crazier than me. She wanted 500. Can you imagine this? Every month, 500. And my wife said, a letter from Turkey. Let me see who writes my husband. That was the end for me. When I came home, she was waiting with a letter in one hand and a stick in the other. How can I blame her? I was thinking with my, I don't know, doctor. And now everybody at home knows this. I was thinking with my balls. I didn't think. Everything good I have made bad. I disappoint God. His eyes brimmed. He had told the story before and had wept before, but each time it was like never before. He experienced the pain afresh and dramatized it each time. And as thought leads to thought, standing there looking at the river, I felt an unexpected pang of my own, a sudden urgency and sorrow. But the image of the one I was thinking of flitted past quickly. It had only been a few weeks, but time had begun to dull even that wound. It was getting cold, but I stood a while longer. How easy it would be, I thought, to slip gently into the water here and go down to the depths. I knelt and trailed my hand in the Hudson. It was frigid. Here we all were, ignoring that water, paying as little attention as possible to the pair of black eternities between which our little light intervened. Our debt, though, to that light, what of it? We owe ourselves our lives. This, about which we physicians say so much to our patients, about which so little can reasonably be said, folds back and also asks us questions. I wiped my hand on my jacket and breathed on my fingers to warm them up. And you know, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go ahead and read the third excerpt since I'm standing up here, and then David and I will have a discussion about process. And I'm really looking forward to that. I think I should take a little bit of water also. Okay, so in the narration of the book, most of it happens in New York City, but in the middle of the book, Julius, the narrator, goes to Brussels for, he says that he's going there to look for his grandmother. This section is about him coming back into the city. So, those thoughts had returned even before I was properly back in the city. The pilot's voice crackling through the system, we are now making our final approach for landing, added to the anxiety of return, because those ordinary and by now banal words seemed to carry some ghostly portent. My thoughts quickly became entangled with one another, so that, in addition to the usual morbid thoughts one normally has on a plane, I was saddled with strange mental transpositions, that the plane was a coffin, that the city below was a vast graveyard with white marble and stone blocks of various heights and sizes. But as we broke through that last layer of clouds, and the city in its true form suddenly appeared 1,000 feet below us, the impression I had was not at all morbid. What I experienced was the unsettling feeling that I had had precisely this view of the city before, accompanied by the equally strong feeling that it had not been from the point of view of a plane. Then it came to me. I was remembering something I had seen about a year earlier, the sprawling scale model of the city that was kept at the Queen's Museum of Art. The model had been built for the World's Fair in 1964 at great cost, and afterward had been periodically updated to keep up with the changing topography and built environment of the city. It showed in impressive detail with almost 1 million tiny buildings, and with bridges, parks, rivers, and architectural landmarks, the true form of the city. The attention to detail was so meticulous that one could not help but think of the cartographers in Borges' story, who, obsessed with accuracy, had made a map so large and so finely detailed that it matched the empire's scale on a ratio of 1:1, a map in which each thing coincided exactly with its spot on the map. The map proved so unwieldy that it was eventually folded up and left to rot in the desert. Our view from the plane as we banked over Queens itself brought all of that back to mind. And in this case, it was the real city that seemed to be matching, point for point, my memory of the model, which I had stared at for a long time from a ramp in the museum. Even the raking evening light falling across the city evoked the spotlighting used at the museum. On the day I had seen the panorama, I had been impressed by the many fine details it presented. The rivulets of roads snaking across a velvety Central Park, the boomerang of the Bronx curving up to the north, the elegant beige spire of the Empire State Building, the white tablets of the Brooklyn piers, and the pair of gray blocks on the southern tip of Manhattan, each about a foot high, representing the persistence in the model of the World Trade Center towers, which in reality had already been destroyed.
Thank you. First, is the sound okay here? Yeah. There was something that you said, that you read there, maybe 7 or 8 sentences before the last sentence. It brought all that to mind. And that word, that last word, mind, is where I want to start this conversation, because what I want to talk a little bit about is how I first read this book. And I read this book in an unusual way, and what happened with this book was unusual for me. I did something that I've never done before as an editor.
Sounds exciting.
It was. It was that I got a call from your agent, Scott Moyers, and I've known Scott for a long time because he used to be an editor at Random House, and he just told me he had something special, and I know Scott well enough to know that that's all he needed to say. And he sent over the file of your novel, but what Scott didn't say, or I didn't hear, was that this was an incomplete novel, an unfinished novel. In fact, maybe it was just about a third of a novel. And I've never bought a first novel that wasn't written all the way through, because there are a lot of risks involved with that. And so I was already a little bit skeptical, even though it was coming from Scott. But I sat down and I started reading it, and immediately I knew. I knew this was something special. I didn't know what this book was about. I didn't know who this character Julius was. I didn't know why he was taking these walks around the city. I didn't know how they would all add up. And I couldn't begin to imagine how they would add up. But what I knew was that this was a mind that I wanted to spend time with, that this was